And we're back, YouTube, back in the garage, back doing another great project for my new to me Scion Tc. As you guys already know, if you guys have seen all the last videos, we've been doing a whole bunch to this car. So today is no different, and as you guys can tell by the thumbnail, it's an exciting day, it's a great day, and it's time to drop her low. So yes guys, today is the day we're installing the coilovers on my Scion Tc. I already know this is going to make it look so great. As far as the coilovers I went with, I decided to do the Rev 9 Hyperstreet IIs. Found them off Amazon and eBay and then a whole bunch of other websites, Fast Scion. As always, I'll put a link down below where I bought mine so you guys can use that if you would like. I do receive a commission, and if you do use my link, I say thank you. First things first, what you're going to have to do is get the vehicle up off the ground, put it on 4 jack stands all around, and if you want, you can go right ahead and take off all 4 wheels. Once you have your car up and all 4 wheels off, next you're going to turn your attention inside the back hatch because you're going to need to get access to those top bolts for your rear suspension. Pretty much up underneath here, you're going to have to take off most of everything. So you don't actually have to take off the sides, but you do have to take off all the bottom pieces and of course your little side compartments for your jack supplies. And then if you have the sub, your sub as well. Here's 2 of those strut bolts, the back side, and then up underneath here on the other side. Really easy to move this around, kind of hard to see on camera, but you can see it right there. There's only 3, 2 on this side, 1 on that side, so that's all the access we'll need. But nonetheless, it's now time to jump into the fun part, jump into the main part of this video. So we'll start at the front since that's the most complicated, then we'll move our way to the back. So up underneath the front side, I'm gonna go ahead and give you guys your bearings as far as the bolts we're gonna be messing with, and then their sizes of course. So jumping right in, as you can see, I have all my little sockets hanging from the bolts that we're gonna need to disconnect. I guess we'll start up here at the top. You're gonna need to disconnect your sway bar end link. So you're gonna need 2 pieces. For the outer bolt itself, or the outer nut rather, you're going to need a 17 millimeter, but for this guy, you're going to actually have to hold the inside. There's this little 5 millimeter Allen wrench hole to prevent the inner threaded portion of the bolt from spinning. You're not going to necessarily be able to use a socket on that. You're just going to have to use a wrench or a ratcheting wrench if you have that. And then making your way over to this side, you're going to have a couple of brackets. I don't have one of the brackets, so hopefully I'll find one at the junkyard, but it's going to hold your vehicle speed sensor, and then the back side is actually going to hold your brake line. So they're both going to be 10 millimeter bolts, so you're going to want to make sure you remove those so you have slack to work with, because this whole lower assembly is going to kind of move down once we pull out the strut. As far as the strut goes, we have a few different sizes. The top bolt, it's not as large as the bottom one, so the nut side you're going to be using a 21 millimeter, and then on the bolt side you're going to be using an 18 millimeter, and then down at the bottom, the biggest bolt, this guy on both sides is a 22 millimeter. Up here at the top, you're going to have to eventually take off your top strut bolts, which I'm about to take off my strut bar as well. But these guys are all a 15 millimeter bolt. You'll be able to access the front one with a socket, but the ones in the back, you're either going to have to use a wrench, or you can just take off your cowl cover, which is just a bunch of clips. I'll probably go that route just because I know I'm going to want to torque it later. I'm going to take this off. There's not really a particular order. I would just say the last thing to do is those ones up top, just so something is holding on your coil itself. So go ahead and take off your little peripheral lines, take off your sway bar end link, and then let's go ahead and take this guy off. Here's my 17 millimeter ratcheting wrench. And then in the middle, there's my 5 millimeter Allen wrench. Put it on there. I gave it some persuasion because it was an awkward angle. I pretty much banged on the wrench with a dead blow hammer, and that's what broke torque. And then from there, I was able to simply loosen it. You don't need the Allen wrench anymore. Take off the nut. You can just kind of push that out of the way, just like that. I already took off that 10 millimeter that I did have, so now my speed sensor line and then my brake line is free. I jumped ahead and I got the top bolt out. This is your camber bolt, and then I'm gonna do the same thing for the bottom one. I was actually able to use a 7/8 that was real similar to the 22 millimeter on that side, and then again I got my 22 millimeter on the impact, big UGA, and I'm just gonna go ahead and take this lower bolt off. Now I'll put something underneath at this point because there's technically nothing holding on your lower control arm. Make sure this doesn't flop, but just in case, put something underneath. now that I got that bolt off, I'm gonna tell you one thing: an impact will definitely be your best friend on this project. It had to work on that bolt a little bit, so got that off, and as you can see, this whole lower arm is now loose, but just make sure this doesn't flop forward and pull your axle out of your transmission. The lower portion of the strut is loose and disconnected, so we're going to turn our attention to the top. Remember, these are 15mm bolts. Leave one of your bolts in there still. Don't take it out all the way, because at that point your strut is free and it could potentially fall. Go ahead and take off that. If you have a strut bar, take that off as well. Once you have those bolts out from up top, so you need to hold it, kind of finagle it down. Just released itself from up top. Make sure you don't catch anything. Kind of hard to do this with one hand. Whew, that was heavy with one hand. But there you go. There's your stock OEM strut. Like I said in a previous video, this guy was lifted. Here's that darn spacer. I do not know why they decided to lift it. We're going to be going from lifted a few inches to dropped a few inches. So it's going to be a pretty drastic change. So now let's go ahead and jump to the back. I'll show you how to remove the back strut assembly, and then we'll get ready to get the new ones installed. So you're going to have to first disconnect your little skid sensor harness and wire. So come to the back like we did in the wheel hub right there. There's your little connector. Disconnect that. You're going to want to disconnect the entire bracket, another 10mm bolt. That'll give you the slack for that line so you don't pull on it. You have your e-brake line, which is this thicker tube down here. Just keep an eye on that if you need to. This bracket right there has a 10mm bolt, and you can provide yourself some slack there. The main two bolts you're going to be worried about today is going to be, of course, the big bolt holding on the bottom side of your strut assembly, and then of course your sway bar end links. We're going to be removing the lower portion of this sway bar end link. The inside will have that Allen wrench, and the outside will be just a normal nut. Just like before, you're going to need to get you a wrench or some type of ratcheting wrench, and then of course you're going to have your little Allen wrench on the inside holding in place the inner portion. You're going to need to support this a little bit more than you needed to do on the front, so get you a jack. Make sure it's put in a good spot where it's not going to damage anything. Kind of take up a very small amount of the weight before you start trying to take off that bolt. Then we'll turn our attention over to the big bolt. The nut is a 19mm, and then I was able to hold on to the bolt side with a 3/4 socket. And then same thing as before, go ahead and take your big ugga and go ahead and take that big old bolt off. One thing I wanted to show you real quick is why you have to have that jack there. So I got the lower bolt off of the sway bar end link and can't really move it still. There's still tension on the line. So if you see here, I'm gonna jack up the jack just a little bit. And boom, you can see it kind of center out in that little bolt hole. So now with a little bit of the tension held, comes right off just like that. I went ahead and I got that big bolt off, and once again, big ugga is going to be your best friend for this bolt. And then at that point, but now this guy from the bottom is ready to come out. I'm gonna go ahead and undo the bolts up top, which these bolts are a 15mm. Here's your two front bolts right there, 1, 2, and then there's one more on the back. And at that point, this rear piece should be able to come on out. Since this does also have that spacer for the lift that they did, it may be a little bit tighter than yours. This lower control arm is kind of putting tension up, so I'm gonna have to push down simultaneously while trying to pull this guy down and out. I'm probably gonna pull the whole strut assembly forward into this little gap right here, so that it'll pull forward, hopefully slide down and come right out from the top. But nonetheless, that's all we have to do to get this off. All right, so there we go. Happy to say that worked. That little gap down there was enough clearance for me to go down and release it from the top. So here we go. Here's my old strut assembly, and here's those 2-inch spacers that were on there. Time for the fun part, time for the exciting part. Go ahead and open up the box. Beautiful. Bright, shiny new REV 9 Hyperstreet 2's coilovers. Already comes with the strut hat bolts. Extremely excited about that. I don't have to worry about reusing the old bolts. But look, side by side, there they are. And one thing I can tell already, it's probably a good 4 inches lower. So that's the main thing we're gonna be doing right now, is figuring out our height settings. I really don't know exactly how it's going to fit as far as how low it's truly going to drop us, but we do know it's going to drop us quite a bit. So mainly what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring out all 4, and then down here at the bottom you can see we have our adjustment nut. This guy is what locks it in place, and then the whole bottom, as you can see, it spins. The whole bottom is how you're going to adjust it outside of the car. This top one here, the one that has this little screw, do not want to touch that. That is what sets your preload, or sets the tension that carries the weight of the vehicle. Has nothing to do with the height. That's your preload. So they do specify and stress, do not mess with this one here, because you'll mess up how it's set from the factory. It's going to be a drastic change, especially in the front. Look at that difference. I have them both lined up currently about at the same spot. Up here at the top, we're looking at, with that spacer, probably closer to 5 or 6 inches, and that's extreme. The next thing we want to worry about is the dampening. These Rev 9 Hyperstreet 2s, they got 32 levels of dampening, which is all controlled by this knob up top. As you can see on the knob, soft, hard. So 32. And right now it's currently set to the softest setting, and you just kind of click it clockwise. You can't really hear it, but I can feel it, the clicks. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth. So I'm going to start in the middle to about 16, and then once we have them on the vehicle and actually get out to drive it, we'll be able to feel how that feels and adjust accordingly. If you have 2 people, this is where definitely you'll benefit from using their help. You got to slide up this coilover into place and then bolt it in just to hold it up. But I don't have 2 people at the moment, so I'm not sure how I'm gonna do this, but that's what's next. This guy here has a little R on it, if you guys can see that. That means right, obviously, and right side is the passenger side of the vehicle. So yeah, this guy is for the back right. Hopefully I'll be able to put this in place on the bottom, jack it up so that it'll hold itself in place, and then I can put the nuts in on the top. So let me try it out, and then we'll move on to torquing it in place. So I went ahead and got it in there. I have the bolt through, but I do not have the nut on. Felt like there was going to be too much tension to get the sway bar end link in after I jacked it up. So I went ahead and tightened that down. You're going to torque that guy down to 32 foot-pounds. And remember, this guy has that Allen wrench attachment thing on the inside, so you got to hold that in place so you don't spin your ball joint. Works perfectly. Just jacked it up a little bit, and now it's holding itself in place. So now, jump up to the top side. Go ahead and hand thread your bolts on from the top, and actually we can go ahead and torque these guys down. And you're going to torque these guys down to 59 foot-pounds. And once you get those bolts up top torqued down, you're going to now turn your attention over to the remaining brackets and the large bolt. So you have that bracket holding your parking brake line. Of course, you already got the sway bar end link, but next you're going to get the bracket that holds your skid sensor. Just tighten that guy down, and of course plug in your skid sensor down there. That large bolt with the very large nut down there, you're actually going to torque that guy down. I'm going to apply a little bit of Loctite, but you're going to torque that guy down to 103 foot-pounds. Once you have that large bolt torqued down, I'm going to move on to the front, but nonetheless, there you go. That's how you do your rear portion of the coilover install. So one thing to note, I already preset my height on these guys to match as far as the front ones go. Over here in the front, it's a lot more simpler than the back because you can easily access the top part. So I'm gonna need 2 hands to do this, but you're literally gonna start bottom up, go ahead and slide this up through the hole, put a couple of nuts there so it doesn't fall out, and then we'll position your knuckle in between the 2 halves on your coilover itself. All right, so there we go. Went ahead and got them hand tightened down, and the upper part of the strut is in place, and I can already tell by the positioning of that knuckle, it's gonna be extremely low. So I did need my jack because of the distance that I have to travel in order to attach this. Make sure you get this guy up between those 2 lugs here, and then of course you're gonna have your sway bar end link line up with this hole as well. So go ahead and jack it up, get them in place, and then try to slide these 2 bolts through if you can. The bolt is on the front side of the vehicle and the nut is on the back side of the vehicle. I also went ahead and torqued down the little bracket onto the lower portion of the coil that holds your brake line. I just tightened that till it was snug. You really don't have to torque it. Next up is going to be these large bolts. As far as the camber bolt goes, I'm going to position it just how it was before. So the manual says that these bolts are actually torqued down to 177 foot-pounds. Really big bolts, really big torque. I also positioned my speed sensor harness up, around, and in front. That's the direction that it needs to go. Make sure you do not get it pinched when you're torquing those big bolts, because you will damage it. All right, so I got those bolts put in and torqued down. And next up, as you can see, I still don't have the sway bar end link in place. I believe I'm gonna have to disconnect it from the other side and kind of turn the sway bar, because the amount of adjustment I need to do, I don't think I can do it one side at a time. I'll have to do them both together. So that'll be saved for last. But real quick, now that we got that in there, you can torque these guys down. These top bolts, they get torqued to 38 foot-pounds. So let's go ahead and torque those guys in there. So now that I got the top torqued down, and then I got the bottom torqued down, I've got the bracket for the brake line put on. You're pretty much now done with everything you can do on one side at a time. I'm now gonna have to go to the other side, disconnect, take everything apart, and just like I said before, pivot the sway bar just a little bit down there in its bushings to give me that little extra bit of clearance that I need to reach up onto the mounting point, as you can see here. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that for the most part off camera. I'm gonna do all the peripherals, and then I'll come back and I'll save the sway bar part for last. All right guys, so there we go. I got the back one on and the front one on. The front one is at this same point like I said before. I do not have the sway bar end link connected. One thing to notice is that now that we do have that disconnected, as you can see, it pivots and it moves up and down. So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go ahead and use two hands, take this off, lift this up. You gotta kind of bend it to put it in place. But as you see there, relatively easy. Kind of goes in place. Just gotta use two hands. And of course, we're gonna torque this guy down. And then when you do torque it down, you're gonna go ahead and torque this guy to 55 foot-pounds. So let me go ahead and do that real quick and show you what it looks like when we're done. Okay, so there we go. We got that guy torqued down to 55. Same thing on the other side. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, you have now completed and successfully installed coilovers on your 2005 to 2010 Scion Tc. Last but not least, you just gotta put back together what you took apart. So I did take off the entire cowl cover so I can access these back bolts and torque those down appropriately. And then one thing I did off camera was actually put all back my little trunk coverings in there. So those are the simple things that don't take too long to do. But yeah, looking up under here, there's my rear ones, there's my front ones. So the last thing I'm actually gonna go ahead and do, I kind of preset the height adjustments. I really won't know what it's gonna look like as far as the fender gap until I get it on the floor. But nonetheless, I have not locked down the locking nut, which is the last thing you guys gotta do. So go ahead and tighten it down. You have a tool that they provided you, spanner wrench right here. Go ahead and make sure you're set equally on both sides and tighten down that lock nut. And just like that, ladies and gentlemen, you've now completed a big project. You've now completed a great project, one that's going to make your Scion Tc stand out from all others. But again, thank you guys for watching another great video with Everything Avery. Make sure you guys stay tuned. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed before. Got plenty of videos as always. So it's another late day. Time for me to go inside, get to bed, get ready for work tomorrow to make more money to do more projects. You guys have a good night.